Imagine for a second that the internet, artificial intelligence, and like cryptocurrency weren't actually created for the noble pursuit of human progress.
Right.
Imagine they were built as, an evolutionary counteroffensive in a centuries-old mating war. Today, we are completely tearing down the pristine narrative of human history.
We really are. It's a total paradigm shift.
Yeah, I mean, the usual story we tell ourselves is basically a clean, sterile staircase, right? Humans
Yeah.
discover fire, then we invent the wheel, build the printing press, split the atom, and eventually launch the internet. It all feels so inevitable.
It feels planned.
Exactly. But the landscape we're exploring today completely demolishes that staircase. We are taking a deep dive into the intersections of human biology, historical power dynamics, and literally the devices sitting in your pocket right now. And the picture it paints is absolutely wild.
It fundamentally reorients how you view technological advancement. I mean, we like to think of innovation as this cerebral, detached endeavor. Yeah. But the framework we are unpacking argues that the actual engine of civilization, the thing driving the creation of everything from the plow to the microchip, is just raw biological strategy.
Which is a lot to process.
It is. And a quick heads up to you before we really dive into this. The theories we're mapping out today from our sources are incredibly provocative.
Very.
We are touching on highly charged evolutionary psychology, controversial gender dynamics, and really heavy critiques of modern political systems.
Yeah, and we should be super clear here. We aren't here to take a side, endorse a worldview, or, jump into the culture wars.
Definitely not.
Right.
Our mission is simply to hold these intricate, often uncomfortable ideas up to the light. We just want to examine the precise logic and mechanisms the sources present so you can understand this specific worldview.
Exactly. So if we accept that technological progress isn't just a sterile staircase, we have to look at what's actually driving it. And the foundational claim here is that the engine of history is a continuous cyclical battle between two archetypes.
The lords and the lawyers.
Right, the lords and the lawyers, and how they manipulate everyone else to secure status and reproduction. But to really understand this, we have to define what sexy and unsexy mean in this historical context. Because, it's not about physical attractiveness.
Not at all. In this framework, sexy equates to high status, control of resources, and systemic power.
Okay.
Historically, a sexy man is a lord. He owns the land, he holds the capital, and he gains his elevated status by forcing unsexy men to do the work.
And by unsexy men, we mean?
The baseline. Working-class men lacking systemic power. The guys doing all the dangerous, backbreaking, undesirable work. The Lord reaps the biological and social rewards of the harvest without ever having to actually swing the scythe.
Oh, okay. Let's ground this in the Middle Ages to see how the mechanism actually works. You have the feudal system, right?
Right.
The lord owns the manor, and the serfs are essentially tied to the dirt. The lord gets the wealth, the castle, the reproductive advantage, while the serf gets, a subsistence living in exchange for hard labor. It's a perfectly closed loop.
Until it isn't.
Right, because then the Black Plague hits in the 1300s. It wipes out a massive percentage of the population, and that completely shatters the economic equilibrium.
It creates an unprecedented labor shock. I mean, think about it. When you suddenly lose a third of the workforce, the supply of labor just plummets.
But people still need to eat.
Exactly. The demand for agricultural output remains constant if the society is going to survive. Before the plague, serfs were easily replaceable. After the plague, a peasant who could plow a field suddenly held immense leverage.
Oh, that makes sense.
Farming the old way became completely unprofitable for the lords. They couldn't just threaten a serf with starvation anymore. That serf could just walk to the next manor over, where a desperate lord would offer him way better conditions.
But here's the thing. A serf isn't a negotiator. A guy whose entire life has been pulling a plow doesn't suddenly know how to, draft a localized labor contract.
No, of course not.
He doesn't know how to exploit the legal loopholes of the manorial system.
And that right there is the birth of the lawyer class in this model.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The serfs realize their newfound leverage, but they lack the systemic knowledge to wield it. So they effectively have to hire proxies. They need advocates.
The lawyers.
Yes, the lawyer class emerges as the intellectual proxy for the exploited, unsexy man. The lawyer goes to the Lord and essentially says, I represent the labor you desperately need. If you want my clients to harvest your wheat, you have to negotiate through me.
So the lawyer gains status and wealth without owning the land?
And without working the land either.
Yeah.
He gains his power purely by controlling the friction between the lord and the serf.
That is fascinating. Fast forward a few centuries, and this exact same mechanism scales up to the birth of the United States.
It scales up perfectly.
Let's look at the American Revolution. If you apply this lens, King George III is the ultimate lord across the ocean, right? He's maintaining a monopoly on the resources and trade of the colonies.
Right.
And who organizes the rebellion? Men like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson.
Literally lawyers.
Okay, wait, let me push back on that for a second. Because Adams and Jefferson were incredibly wealthy landowners themselves. They weren't exactly downtrodden serfs plowing the fields.
They weren't serfs, no. But the lord and lawyer dynamic is relative.
Relative how?
Well, relative to the British crown, the colonial elite were legally subservient. They were subjects. The crown was extracting wealth from their agricultural and mercantile efforts without granting them systemic power.
Taxation without representation.
Exactly. So Adams, Jefferson, and the colonial political class adopted the role of the lawyer. They leveraged the very real grievances of the working-class colonists, the blacksmiths, the farmers, the unsexy men who would actually hold the muskets and die at Valley Forge.
They used them to break the Lord's monopoly?
Yes, the working men fought the war, but the lawyers drafted the Constitution and installed themselves as the new ruling class.
And as soon as they become the new ruling class, the pendulum just keeps swinging. Because after the revolution, we barrel straight into the Industrial Revolution.
And here, the biological status shifts yet again.
Right, because the Black Plague made labor scarce and valuable. Industrialization does the exact opposite. You suddenly have machines that can do the work of 50 men.
And you have massive migrations of unsexy men crowding into urban centers, completely flooding the labor market.
The value of the individual unsexy man just plummets to zero.
He is entirely replaceable on the assembly line. Because his individual leverage is gone, he can no longer negotiate a living wage, let alone acquire the resources necessary to be viable in the mating market.
He is biologically and economically stranded.
Precisely. So what is the evolutionary response? The working class men have to abstractly hire a massive new proxy class.
The unions.
Exactly. They form labor unions, and they elevate a new breed of political lawyers to advocate for them. The modern political class is born from this glut of undesirable labor needing representation against the industrial lords.
You mean the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the factory owners?
Yep, the new lords of industry.
Which brings us to the 1960s. And this is where this dynamic of the sexy enslaving the unsexy hits an absolute breaking point with the Vietnam War.
It's a huge pivot point in the framework.
According to this theory, the politicians, the modern lawyers, have consolidated so much power that they are now the ones orchestrating forced labor. They are instituting the draft.
Right.
They are taking the poorest, most disconnected, most unsexy men from rural towns and inner cities and conscripting them to fight and die in a proxy industrial war in a jungle halfway across the world.
And this is where the modern university system enters the narrative. It fundamentally changes its purpose during this era.
How so?
Think about the middle-class men of the 1960s, the ones with just enough resources and social capital. They needed a way to avoid being enslaved by the political class.
They needed a sanctuary?
Yes, and the state provided a massive loophole, the educational deferment. If you were enrolled in a university, the lawyers couldn't send you to the meat grinder.
So the university completely transforms from an institution of rigorous vocational training into a literal draft sanctuary.
Exactly.
The men hiding out on campuses are basically avoiding the fate of the unsexy men dying in the mud. But the transition from a 1960s draft sanctuary to a modern validation hive, that is where this evolutionary biology argument gets incredibly uncomfortable.
It does. Because if the 1960s changed who was in the university, the cultural shifts of that exact same era changed what was happening inside those walls.
We are talking about the sexual revolution.
We are. The widespread availability of the birth control pill and shifting cultural norms essentially decoupled sex from long-term provisioning.
Which changed everything.
Completely. For almost all of human history, the biological imperative for a woman was to carefully select a mate who would stick around. Someone who would provide resources, protect offspring, build shelter.
She had to prioritize the mountain mover, right? The unsexy, responsible builder.
Because if she chose recklessly, the biological and social consequences were absolutely devastating.
Right, but the technological intervention of reliable contraception severed that biological risk.
Once women were freed from the absolute necessity of trading sex for long-term provisioning, the mating market fundamentally altered.
So what did they prioritize instead?
Well, the framework argues that women were now free to act on a different set of biological desires. They could reward the ostentatious men.
The charismatic, rebellious, high-status flexors?
Exactly. The text categorizes these as city-burning men, contrasting them with the mountain-moving men.
City burners versus mountain movers. I really want to make sure I grasp the mechanism here.
Okay, let's break it down.
A mountain mover builds the infrastructure. He maintains the power grid, writes the code, designs the plumbing. He is fundamentally necessary for civilization, but his work is invisible, unglamorous, and requires immense delayed gratification.
Right.
Whereas a city burner is a conqueror, a revolutionary, a charismatic leader, or like a rock star. He captures immediate attention, disrupts the status quo, and displays high systemic dominance.
That is the exact distinction. And the argument is that when survival is guaranteed by the state and technology, the mating market shifts entirely to reward the city burners.
Leaving the mountain movers behind.
The responsible, unsexy men who actually maintain the infrastructure are completely left behind. And nowhere is this dynamic more concentrated than inside the modern university system.
Which this framework likens to a biological beehive.
Yes, the beehive analogy.
Let's break down how a real beehive operates, because it's crucial to understanding this critique of higher education.
It's a wild comparison.
In an actual hive, you have thousands of worker bees. They do the tangible, labor foraging, building honeycomb, defending the colony. They are fed trace amounts of a substance called royal jelly.
Which suppresses their reproductive development so they remain purely focused on labor.
Exactly. But if you take a standard larva and feed it continuous, massive amounts of royal jelly, it physically alters. It becomes a queen. Its entire biology shifts toward reproduction, attention, and maintaining royal status within the hive.
Now, map that biological mechanism onto the modern university.
Okay.
The text argues that universities have evolved into female-dominated hives. Instead of focusing on scalable vocational training, teaching students how to move mountains, the academic core has shifted.
Toward what the author brutally labels unscalable complaining pursuits.
Yes. We are talking about grievance studies, perpetual political activism, and ideological signaling.
But wait, how does the royal jelly actually work in a college setting?
The virtual royal jelly is validation. It's grades in subjective disciplines, social capital, ideological approval.
Academic credentials that signal elite status without requiring the production of tangible economic value.
Exactly. And the people dispensing this virtual royal jelly are a select few high-status, sexy males who have secured defensive positions within the hive.
Like tenured radical professors.
Or charismatic administrators.
Yeah.
Or donor-backed ideologues. They dispense endless validation to the female students, drawing them away from practical careers and onto this queen track of attention-seeking and societal critique.
Okay, if the women are on the queen track, absorbing all this virtual royal jelly and learning how to critique society rather than build it, what happens to the human drones? What happens to the unsexy men in this university hive?
Think about it. If you are a man who realizes your success rate in the localized mating market of a liberal arts campus is near zero because you aren't a charismatic city burner, what is your biological response?
You withdraw.
You withdraw into the difficult objective domains where virtual royal jelly has no power. You retreat into the tangible fields. STEM, engineering, computer science, mathematics.
The basements.
The basement labs. These are domains where a bridge either stands or falls, where code either compiles or crashes. You absolutely cannot bluff your way through a fluid dynamics exam with ideological signaling.
Wow, so the unsexy men are systematically shunted into the basement labs, quietly doing the heavy lifting, building the digital and physical infrastructure of the modern world, but they receive absolutely zero of the social or mating capital on campus.
They are the invisible workers maintaining the hive while the queens are trained to complain.
I want you to think about this dynamic for a second. If federal tax money is subsidizing a system where an entire demographic is trained in grievance politics, turning higher education from a vocational engine into a massive validation mill, does that completely reframe the student debt crisis for you?
It really should.
Because the implication here is that the debt crisis isn't an economic accident. It is the direct result of a distorted mating market heavily subsidized by the lawyer class, the state.
And that leads to the ultimate trap. Because what happens when the 4 years are up? The university hive ejects you into the real world.
The virtual royal jelly runs out.
It runs dry. These graduates are suddenly holding massive state-guaranteed student loans, but their degrees in ideological activism do not translate to scalable, high-earning skills in the private market.
They are literally holding the bag. The irony is staggering. Women chased the sexy men to the universities during the sexual revolution, ended up chasing the unsexy mountain movers out of the social sphere and into the STEM basements, and are now left entirely enslaved by the very lawyer class they were training to join.
They have undischargeable debt to the state and no economic engine to pay it off.
So how do they survive? This is where the framework introduces the economic reality of the validation economy running dry, triggering a mechanism it calls hoflation.
Yes, hoflation.
Hoflation. I mean, that sounds like a cynical internet meme, not a macroeconomic theory. How does the author actually justify mapping inflation mechanics onto modern dating?
It sounds wild, but it works exactly like monetary inflation, except the currency isn't money, it's attention and status.
Okay, break that down.
Look at the Gini coefficient of modern dating apps. A Gini coefficient measures inequality. In a healthy economy, wealth is distributed across a bell curve.
Right, a solid middle class.
But on dating apps, the algorithm naturally funnels 80 to 90% of female attention to the top 10% of men.
The hypervisible, ostentatious men.
The ones who flex luxury lifestyles.
Yeah.
Because every woman in the hive now has digital access to the profiles of these top-tier men. Her baseline standard for a viable mate hyperinflates.
So the middle class of dating gets completely hollowed out. The average unsexy mountain mover practically vanishes from the pool.
He's invisible. But here's the paradox of hoflation. Those top 10% of men have unlimited options. They have zero biological incentive to commit to long-term provisioning.
So you have this massive population of highly educated women burdened with crippling debt from their complaining degrees, holding out for a tier of men who refuse to commit.
Exactly. The traditional route of marrying a provider to help shoulder the economic burden is blocked by their own inflated standards.
So they are trapped, the state demands its loan payments, the private sector doesn't value their grievance degrees, and the mating market is fundamentally broken. What is their last resort?
They have to monetize their only remaining asset.
Their sexual and visual capital.
Yes. They turn to the internet, they turn to platforms like OnlyFans.
And here is the brutal, cyclical irony of the entire historical progression. We have to look at the technological infrastructure they are relying on.
This is the best part.
Who built the internet? Who built the smartphones, the low-latency video streaming protocols, the secure payment processing algorithms, the massive data centers?
The unsexy men. The mountain movers who were banished to the STEM basements.
This is the core thesis of the technological timeline. The author argues that the entire computer revolution, from the ENIAC in the 1940s to the ARPANET in the 1960s to the modern internet, and crucially its original killer app, pornography, was built by men as a direct, evolutionary counteroffensive to being left behind by the sexual revolution.
A counteroffensive. Let's really dig into this idea.
Yeah, because it's easy to just say nerds like technology. But this framework is claiming that the creation of the digital world was a redirected biological imperative.
It's all about biological drive.
Explain the mechanism of how testosterone transitions from, like, building physical bridges to writing code.
It comes down to what that hormone is meant to do. The framework highlights that men, on average, possess 10 to 20 times the testosterone of women.
Which is an engine for risk-taking.
Risk-taking, systemic ambition, and status-seeking. Throughout human history, that engine was harnessed by society. Men moved mountains, cleared forests, laid railroad tracks, and fought brutal wars because that is what society, and specifically women, demanded of them in order to achieve status, secure a mate, and reproduce.
There's a quote in the source material that hits like a sledgehammer. Society is only as good as what women make men do to get sex.
It is a profound, if controversial, distillation of evolutionary psychology. If a society demands that men build strong, stable communities to win female approval, you get a strong, stable civilization.
But when the sexual revolution and the welfare state removed that requirement,
when women began rewarding the city burners instead, the system stopped rewarding the mountain movers with family formation.
But the testosterone doesn't just evaporate. That immense biological drive to build, to conquer systems, to achieve mastery, it has to go somewhere.
Exactly. If the unsexy man cannot win the physical mating game because the rules have been altered to favor ostentatious displays, he will build a new, substitute reality, where his mountain-moving skills make him a god.
He redirects his energy into digital escapism.
He builds massive, multiplayer online worlds. He invents cryptocurrency to bypass the lawyer's financial system. He develops artificial intelligence.
And crucially, he builds a global communications network whose first highly profitable application is pornography, a digital substitute for the mating market he was excluded from.
It's a pure evolutionary pivot. And now the two timelines collide perfectly at OnlyFans.
It's insane to think about. These indebted women are essentially forced to use devices, algorithms, and platforms created by the very men they rejected.
In order to bail themselves out of the debt, they accrued learning how to complain about those same men.
It is like a casino where the house always wins. The lawyers, the state loan, the money for the degree. The students buy into the validation game at the university hive. But when the chips are down and the crushing reality of the debt comes due,
The only way to pay off the house is to use the digital infrastructure built by the guys who were never invited to the party in the first place.
as the author brilliantly observes, the wounds torn by the sexual revolution are being healed by the global communications network that was used to prepare it.
It is the ultimate revenge of the nerds, played out on a macroeconomic scale.
The unsexy men are liberating themselves through technology, while the women who participated in the validation mill find themselves increasingly trapped by it, forced into a digital gig economy just to service the interest on their student loans.
But we have to ask, what are the unsexy men doing right now? Because if they built this massive digital infrastructure, they aren't just sitting around managing the servers for OnlyFans.
Right. According to the deep dive into modern trends, they are executing a mass exodus. They are disappearing.
The term the framework uses is manishing.
Manishing, like vanishing, but men.
Exactly. It is the systematic, quiet withdrawal of baseline men from traditional societal games. They are looking at the math of hoflation on dating apps, realizing the return on investment is fundamentally negative, and they are simply deleting the apps.
They are eschewing formal higher education because it has become a hostile, female-dominated environment that offers them no virtual royal jelly.
They aren't going to nightclubs, they aren't buying diamond rings, they are embracing extreme minimalism.
And the societal reaction to this is fascinating. You would think that if women are empowered and independent, men quietly withdrawing to play video games and live in tiny apartments wouldn't be a problem at all.
You would think?
But the framework points out that society reacts with visceral hostility to minimalism. When men point out these dropout trends in a deadpan, analytical manner, they are met with absolute fury from the media and the cultural elite.
Why do you think that is?
Why does a guy choosing to live quietly with his dog and his PlayStation provoke so much rage?
Because the entire economic engine of modern society relies on the surplus labor and the consumption habits of the mountain-moving man.
Oh, wow.
The state needs his tax dollars to fund the university validation mills and the administrative bureaucracies. The consumer economy needs him to grind 60 hours a week in a cubicle so he can buy a mortgage he doesn't actually need, a luxury car to impress women who won't look at him, and endless consumer goods to signal status.
If he stops grinding, if he realizes he doesn't need to play the game, the tax base starts to crumble.
Exactly. Manishing is an existential threat to the lawyer class. If the unsexy man opts out of the consumption validation loop, the underlying financial engine of the whole society threatens to stall.
He is taking his ball and going home.
And the people who rely on his labor to fund their advocacy and their academic sinecures are absolutely panicking.
But they aren't just going home and doing nothing. They're building tools that actively dismantle the power structures of the elite. Which brings us to the democratization of artificial intelligence and the blue-collar rebellion.
This is where the technological opt-out stops being just a mating strategy and becomes a massive economic disruption.
The framework provides a perfect, localized example of this shift. It references a specific thread on X, formerly Twitter, from May 2026. An account posted a 15-second, entirely AI-generated video clip.
I remember reading about this, the woman on the bus.
Yes. Walk us through the mechanics of why this specific video caused such an uproar.
So the video starts completely mundanely. A woman is just sitting on a city bus. But suddenly, it cuts to an incredibly high-fidelity, over-the-top action sequence.
Right.
She climbs out the window onto the roof of the moving bus. A giant cinematic monster attacks the city. She transforms into a suit of glowing, high-tech power armor and just blasts the creature.
And the visual effects are nearly indistinguishable from a Marvel movie.
Exactly. And the original poster made a profound observation. They said the truly scary part wasn't that AI was going to replace Hollywood. The scary part was that some random person with a laptop was suddenly able to produce a sequence that 3 years ago would have required a $10 million budget
A unionized crew of 300 people.
and the permission of a major studio executive.
The traditional Hollywood gatekeepers, the VFX artists, the screenwriters, the studio heads, they lost their minds over this. They quote-tweeted it in an absolute panic.
Calling it scary, dismissing it as soulless slop, and demanding heavy regulations.
But the framework brilliantly flips the perspective. It asks us to look at this not from the perspective of the Hollywood elite, but from the perspective of a blue-collar worker, specifically a guy making minimum wage working at a fulfillment center in Columbus, Ohio.
For that minimum wage worker, AI is the exact opposite of scary. It is the most empowering tool ever created.
Think about it. For his entire life, if he had a brilliant cinematic vision, it was trapped in his head. He had zero agency.
He couldn't access the Capitol. He couldn't navigate the nepotistic networks of Los Angeles. And he couldn't afford the specialized training to use complex rendering software.
He was completely locked out by the lords of the entertainment industry.
But suddenly, the unsexy tech bros in Silicon Valley drop an open-source AI video generator right into his lap. And with a few text prompts, that blue-collar worker can bypass the entire Hollywood apparatus.
He gains immense immediate agency. He can express his ideas at a professional million-dollar level without ever having to beg a corporate gatekeeper for permission or budget.
This is exactly why the elites panic at every major technological leap. When the printing press was invented, the church and the monarchy panicked because they lost their monopoly on information.
AI is just the ultimate democratization of production. The Hollywood elites are functioning exactly like the old feudal lords. They want to gatekeep the tools of production to maintain their status. They want to force the unsexy masses to consume their content on their terms. And AI allows the everyday worker to bypass them entirely. Imagine being that worker in Ohio, finally given a voice, and turning on the news to see highly paid, coastal creatives demanding that Congress ban the tool that gave you that voice.
Claiming it's a danger to society.
It's incredibly elitist. It's the lords literally trying to legislate the printing press out of existence. But the framework argues that it's not just Hollywood gatekeepers who are facing extinction.
Yeah, it goes much deeper.
Widespread automation and AI are threatening an even more powerful, entrenched group, the political advocacy class.
This brings us to what the author calls the progressive paradox. It is one of the most conceptually dense parts of the theory, dealing heavily with the concept of mission capture within institutions.
Let's define mission capture first, just so the mechanism makes sense. Mission capture is what happens when an organization is created to solve a specific problem. But over time, the organization becomes massive, well-funded, and employs thousands of people. And eventually, the primary goal of the organization quietly shifts from actually solving the original problem to simply ensuring the organization itself survives, so the employees keep getting paid and maintain their social status.
Exactly. A cancer charity that actually cures cancer puts itself out of business.
Wow.
Now, apply that mechanism to the entire progressive social advocacy ecosystem. The foundation of much of modern advocacy, the NGOs, the activist networks, the political organizers, is the narrative of systemic class struggle.
The foundational premise is that the rich generate their wealth by exploiting the labor of the poor.
Therefore, the unsexy workers need a massive class of lawyers, advocates, regulators, and politicians to fight for them, heavily regulate the rich, and redistribute the wealth.
So the advocacy class derives its entire moral authority, its funding, and its social sexiness from being the indispensable shield for the exploited worker.
But what happens in a fully automated economy? What happens when AI and advanced robotics scale to the point that they can handle the agricultural, industrial, and logistical labor?
The exploitation ends.
Exactly. If machines do the work, the rich no longer need to exploit human workers to generate wealth. The capital and the algorithms generate the value autonomously.
And if there are no exploited human workers,
The fundamental justification for the entire advocacy ecosystem completely collapses.
and it goes even deeper than that. Because AI doesn't just automate the labor of the rich. It democratizes the capability of the poor.
Right.
If open source AI tools allow that blue-collar worker in Columbus to generate massive wealth independently by creating blockbuster media or coding software or running an automated logistics business from his laptop, he doesn't need to be employed by the rich.
And more importantly, he doesn't need the permission or the protection of the lawyers.
That is the progressive paradox. If AI actually solves poverty, ends labor exploitation, and provides immense upward mobility to the unsexy masses, the business model of fighting for the oppressed goes completely bankrupt.
The advocates lose their moral leverage, their massive philanthropic funding streams, and their client base.
This is why, according to the framework, you see such intense institutional pushback against open source AI. You see calls for heavy federal regulation, warnings about the existential dangers of uncontrolled algorithms, and demands for safety committees.
It's institutional self-preservation disguised as compassion. The lawyers are terrified that the serfs are going to liberate themselves with technology before the lawyers can negotiate a cut.
And the framework traces this fear right back to the evolutionary mating war. It makes a highly provocative claim about the root psychology driving this elite panic.
It says the ultimate fear of the traditional hierarchy is, quote, geeky men getting laid.
That is such a jarring phrase. But when you look at the mechanics we've discussed, it perfectly synthesizes the shift.
It does.
Historically, the mating hierarchy dictates that women are biologically drawn to high-status men who control resources. The traditional path was sexy lords controlling unsexy men to get resources, or sexy lawyers organizing the unsexy men to steal the resources from the lords.
But either way, the unsexy man is at the bottom, doing the work and failing in the mating market.
But if AI and automation allow the geeky, unsexy men to achieve immense status, immense wealth, and incredible leverage entirely independently, using tools they built themselves, without exploiting a single human worker, and without ever asking a lawyer for representation, it completely dismantles the traditional hierarchy.
The unsexy tech bro bypasses the lords, ignores the lawyers, and suddenly becomes highly viable in the mating market on its own terms.
The elite class isn't just losing economic control, they're losing their biological dominance.
Which sets the stage for the final and absolutely wildest part of this deep dive.
If the current system is a trap of debt, validation hives, and gatekeeping lawyers desperately trying to hold on to power, how exactly do the unsexy men use this technology to build a permanent escape hatch? How do they lock the lawyers out forever?
The framework introduces a theoretical future architecture it calls the robo-state.
Robo-state.
Yes. Robo-state is essentially the endgame of the mountain movers' technological counteroffensive. It is a vision of a society where subjective, corruptible human governance is entirely replaced by immutable computer code.
Because the unsexy men realize that as long as humans are in charge of the rules, the lawyers will eventually infiltrate the system, create loopholes, and exploit the workers.
The only way to stop the lords versus lawyer cycle is to remove human beings from the enforcement of property and contracts altogether.
And they do this using artificial intelligence, smart contracts, and a cryptographic concept called zero-knowledge proofs, or ZKPs. We really need to break down ZKPs because this is the magical mechanism that makes a trustless society possible.
Let's use a classic analogy to explain the mechanism. Imagine your friend is colorblind, and you have two billiard balls.
Okay, 2 billiard balls.
One is red and one is green. Your friend believes they are identical in color. You need to prove to your friend that they are different colors, but you absolutely cannot reveal which one is red and which one is green. How do you do it?
Okay, so I'm proving a secret without revealing the secret itself.
Right. You tell your friend to put both hands behind their back, holding one ball in each hand. Then you tell them to bring the balls out and show you.
I see.
You look at them. Then they put their hands behind their back again. Now they secretly choose to either switch the balls between their hands or keep them in the same hands.
Okay.
They bring them out again, and you have to tell them whether they switch them or not.
Well, since I'm not colorblind, if the red one was in the left hand and now it's in the right hand, I know they switched them.
Exactly. If the balls were actually the same color, you would only have a 50-50 chance of guessing correctly. But if you do this test 20 times in a row, and you guess correctly every single time,
The mathematical probability that I'm just guessing becomes 0.
you have mathematically proven to your friend that the balls are different colors without ever telling them which color is which.
That is brilliant.
That is a zero-knowledge proof. It is a cryptographic method that allows you to prove you know something or possess something without revealing any of the underlying data.
So in the context of the robo-state, it means you can prove to a smart contract that you are a citizen over the age of 18 without revealing your name or birth date.
You can prove you have enough cryptocurrency to buy a house without revealing your bank balance or your identity to a credit agency.
And a smart contract is just a piece of code on a blockchain that automatically executes an action when those mathematical conditions are met. There is no middleman. There is no escrow agent.
There is no lawyer.
Now combine ZKPs, smart contracts, and robotics. The framework visualizes an autonomous robot building a house using 3D printed architecture. To buy that house, you don't go to a bank. You don't hire a real estate attorney to do a title search.
You don't petition a human zoning board for a permit.
You simply use a ZKP to anonymously verify your funds. You send Bitcoin to a specific smart contract address, and the company automatically transfers the cryptographic deed to your wallet and physically unlocks the smart door of the house for you.
It completely circumvents the state. It removes the human friction where the lawyer class extracts their wealth. And the framework argues this is necessary to prevent what it calls incompetence creep.
Incompetence creep.
It's the fatal flaw of human institutions. In a human-run system, wealth and power are eventually inherited by entitled heirs who don't know how to maintain the systems, or bureaucratic lawyers implement ideological rules that actively ruin functioning infrastructure.
Which leads to societal collapse and resentment, which just restarts the lords versus lawyers cycle all over again.
But a smart contract doesn't care about your ideology. It doesn't care who your parents were. It doesn't care about your complaints. It simply executes the math. It enforces absolute competence and reciprocity.
The text gets incredibly detailed here, outlining specific speculative applications for how this robo-state would fix the societal loops we discussed earlier. Let's look at VitaChain. How does the robo-state handle welfare or universal basic income?
The framework is highly critical of traditional universal basic income, arguing that paying people simply to exist subsidizes baseline incompetence, encourages unhealthy lifestyles, and massively burdens the healthcare system.
So what's the alternative?
VitaChain. It's a blockchain system that uses biometric sensors to track verifiable fitness metrics. You aren't paid to exist. You are paid in digital currency for exercising.
So the AI literally pays you to go for a run.
Exactly. And that currency is programmed so it can only be spent on healthy food or preventative health care. The mechanism aligns personal incentive with systemic health.
You are rewarded for being an asset to the biological strength of the society, rather than being subsidized as a burden.
And if you need to consume beyond your means, there's dynamic smart credit.
How does that work?
Instead of going into credit card debt with a bank, which is just another lord, when you consume a good, the AI automatically creates a debt to society. But immediately, the AI evaluates your specific skill set and offers you tailored, localized gig work to pay off that specific debt.
It gamifies the economy. If I want a new television, the AI might say, you owe 40 hours of localized delivery driving or 10 hours of coding.
You execute the smart contract, do the work, the debt is cleared instantly, and the society gets tangible labor. It forces reciprocal contribution without needing a human boss.
But the most provocative concept, the one designed to be a direct satirical solution to the OnlyFans validation loop and the hoflation crisis, is a theoretical architecture called hot thought.
Yes.
Walk us through the mechanism of this AI meta-platform.
Hot thought is envisioned as the ultimate technological fix for the distorted mating market. In this system, women, the content queens, still produce visual content. But instead of submitting it to a platform to extract simp cash from desperate, unsexy men, they submit it directly to the robo-state AI.
And what does the AI do with it?
The content serves purely as training data for the machine vision algorithms. The AI evaluates the aesthetic value of the content objectively, using math, not emotion.
And what do the women get in return if there are no human men paying them?
The AI compensates them autonomously. It commands those 3D printing robots to build them physical assets. It literally builds them castles. Real, functional urban architecture, studios, and luxury apartments.
The women get their validation and they get their massive student debts paid off via legitimate real estate.
Yes.
But who funds the robots and the materials?
Investor kings. High net worth individuals or syndicates who buy fractional shares in these massive content pools via virtual currency. And crucially, all of this is handled completely anonymously through zero-knowledge proofs.
So the investors don't know who the women are and the women don't know who the investors are.
Exactly. It completely removes the human friction. The simps, the desperate men, are removed from the equation, preventing the tragedies of obsession, the draining of their resources.
The women get their biological drive for validation and luxury met by a machine.
And the unsexy mountain movers, who built the AI backend, capture the macroeconomic upside of the entire system without ever having to participate in the toxic validation theater.
It is the absolute pinnacle of the managing infrastructure. It is a system designed to satisfy human biological imperatives, status, validation, resource allocation, through cold, impartial algorithms, completely bypassing the corruptible human systems that the lawyers use to enslave people.
Wait,
I have to pause and push back on this because while the engineering logic is fascinating, the sociological implication is incredibly dark.
it is very dystopian to some.
We are talking about a world where human interaction, community, and even the mating market are entirely mediated by cold, impersonal algorithms. It's a completely trustless society. We isolate ourselves from the friction of dealing with other humans by handing the keys to an AI. Is a cold, impartial algorithm really better than a flawed, corrupt human gatekeeper?
That is the philosophical crux of the entire framework. The author argues that human systems inevitably, without exception, fall victim to biological drives. Lords will always seek dominance,
Lawyers will always seek leverage to extract wealth.
and the mating market will always corrupt academic and political institutions into validation mills. The algorithm is the only entity immune to virtual royal jelly.
Because it's a machine.
It enforces competence, it prevents incompetence creep, and it distributes resources based on verified contribution rather than ideological signaling. To the mountain mover who has been historically exploited by both the lords and the lawyers, a cold, trustless algorithm is the purest form of justice.
Well, we have covered an unbelievable paradigm-shifting amount of ground today.
We really have.
We completely demolished the pristine staircase of human progress. We traced the hidden biological engine of history, from feudal lords and the labor shocks of the Black Plague to how literal lawyers orchestrated the American Revolution.
We mapped how the Industrial Revolution devalued the individual worker, leading to the rise of modern political lawyers.
And how the 1960s draft forced middle-class men into university sanctuaries to avoid proxy wars. We explored the explosive aftermath of the sexual revolution, where the decoupling of sex from provisioning turned those university sanctuaries into female-dominated validation hives, rewarding the city burners and exiling the mountain movers.
We unpacked the brutal, cyclical irony of hoflation, where indebted women resort to OnlyFans, the killer app of the digital infrastructure built by the very men they rejected, to pay off the state.
We looked at the blue-collar AI rebellion in Columbus, Ohio, and how the democratization of creation terrifies the elite gatekeepers. We revealed the progressive paradox, where the end of labor exploitation threatens to bankrupt the advocacy class.
And finally, we walked through the surreal, mathematically rigorous utopia of the robo-state, where zero-knowledge proofs and autonomous robots offer the ultimate technological escape hatch from human corruption.
It is an incredibly sweeping, deeply controversial narrative. But let's bring it back to why this matters to you, listening right now. You can completely reject the evolutionary psychology frameworks. You can fiercely disagree with the political critiques of the university system and the progressive advocacy class.
But the underlying macroeconomic data points that this framework attempts to explain are undeniably real and happening around us right now. Global birth rates are plummeting.
Young men are systematically opting out of higher education, traditional dating, and legacy corporate structures.
Artificial intelligence is rapidly democratizing creative power while simultaneously threatening the secure, white-collar roles of the traditional lawyer class.
We are watching a massive tectonic societal shift, where technology is fundamentally rewriting the foundational rules of labor, love, and power. Understanding the underlying and sometimes uncomfortable theories that attempt to explain why these shifts are occurring is absolutely crucial to navigating whatever paradigm comes next.
Exactly. You don't have to agree with the cartographer to realize you are standing in completely new territory.
And to leave you with one final provocative thought drawn from the deepest assertions of today's deep dive. The framework claims, at its core, that society is only as good as what women make men do to get sex. Historically, for thousands of years, men moved mountains, built massive physical infrastructure, forged civilizations, and fought brutal wars for that biological reward. But if artificial intelligence, virtual companions, and autonomous robotics can now fulfill those biological status and resource desires automatically without requiring a man to build a bridge, fight a war, or grind for 40 years in a cubicle, what happens to the human drive that built civilization in the first place? When the raw, ancient machinery of our biological imperatives meets the infinite, frictionless possibilities of AI, the picture of our future doesn't get clearer. It shatters. Think about that the next time you interact with an algorithm.